What if the most loving thing you can do for your adult children is to need them less? I know that might sound strange, maybe even a little painful to hear. But stay with me, because in the next 25 minutes, I'm going to share something that took me 4 decades of working with real people to fully understand. Right now, close to 1 in 3 Americans over the age of 60 are living in a state of emotional dependence on their adult children, and most of them have no idea that's what's happening. They think they're just being a good parent, a devoted grandparent, a close family. But there's a difference, a huge, life-changing difference, between being close to your family and building your entire life around them. Today, I'm going to show you exactly what that difference looks like. 7 specific ways. 7 turning points. And by the end, I think you'll see your own life a little differently. I've spent over 40 years as a clinical psychologist working with adults, many of them in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, navigating some of the most important transitions life has to offer. Before we dive in, I want to be very clear about something. This video is not about pushing your children away. It is not a case against family. Quite the opposite. Everything I'm about to share comes from a deep belief that your relationship with your children can be more meaningful, more joyful, and more real when it isn't carrying the entire weight of your emotional life. So let me define the 2 models we're comparing today. Model A is what I call aging with your children. This is when your daily life, your schedule, your mood, your sense of purpose, your identity revolves around your kids. Whether they call, whether they visit, what they need, what they think of you. Model B is aging with a life of your own. This means you maintain your own identity, your own friendships, your own goals and passions, alongside your family, not instead of them. Now let's look at the 7 differences. Difference number 1, identity, 2 o'clock, 5 o'clock, parent versus person. The first difference is identity. Who are you when no one is asking you for anything? When we age primarily through our children, our identity slowly narrows down to a single role: mom, dad, grandpa, grandma. And while those are beautiful roles, they are not a complete human identity. I had a patient, I'll call her Margaret, 68 years old, sharp as a tack, wonderful sense of humor. When her youngest son got married and moved to another state, she fell into a depression that surprised everyone around her, including herself. She told me, "I don't know who I am anymore. Nobody needs me." That's the vulnerability of building your identity entirely inside the parent role. When the role changes, and it will change, there's nothing left to stand on. The psychologist Erik Erikson described the challenge of this stage of life as generativity versus stagnation. Generativity means contributing to the world, creating things, mentoring people, building communities in ways that go beyond your immediate family. When we skip that, we stagnate. We shrink. People who age with a life of their own maintain what I call a multidimensional identity. They are gardeners, writers, volunteers, travelers, learners, teachers, friends. They are people, not just parents. And here's what's remarkable. Those people tend to be far better parents and grandparents, because they show up to family time full, not empty. Difference number 2, emotional regulation, 500, 800. Borrowed happiness versus built-in happiness. The second difference is where your happiness comes from. When your life revolves around your children, your emotional state becomes tied to their behavior. Did your daughter call today? Good, you feel loved. She didn't? Suddenly the whole afternoon feels hollow. Your son brought the grandkids over for Sunday dinner. Wonderful week. He canceled last minute. Terrible week. Psychologists call this emotional outsourcing. You've handed the remote control to your own feelings over to someone else, and they don't even know they're holding it. The problem isn't that you love your children. The problem is that love without a stable internal foundation creates a kind of emotional fragility that doesn't serve you, or them. What we want to build instead is what researchers call a hedonic baseline, a resting level of well-being that doesn't collapse when life doesn't go according to plan. People who have their own friendships, hobbies, routines, and passions maintain that baseline. They can have a wonderful weekend with family and a wonderful Tuesday by themselves. Let me ask you something, and I want you to really sit with this question. Do you feel genuinely at peace on a regular Tuesday? A day when the kids don't call, there are no plans, no visitors, just you and your life. If that question makes you uncomfortable, that's information worth paying attention to. Difference number 3. Health outcomes, 8 o'clock, 11:30. Waiting versus living. The third difference shows up in your body as much as your mind, and the research here is striking. When our life is primarily organized around waiting for the next visit, the next phone call, the next family gathering, we spend enormous amounts of time in a passive state. Less movement, less mental stimulation, less novelty, less challenge, and our brains and bodies pay a price for that. The Harvard Study of Adult Development, one of the longest-running studies on human happiness and health ever conducted, found something powerful. It wasn't just having close relationships that predicted long, healthy, joyful lives. It was the quality and diversity of those relationships. People who had rich social lives outside their immediate family, friendships, community ties, group memberships, were significantly healthier, both physically and cognitively, than those who were socially isolated, even within loving families. In my own clinical practice, I noticed a pattern over many years. The patients who recovered best from illness, heart surgery, joint replacement, even serious diagnoses, were almost always the ones who had what I came to call a reason to get up in the morning that had nothing to do with their children. A garden they were tending, a class they were taking, a friend they met for coffee every Thursday. Active aging is not just a slogan. It is a survival strategy. And it requires building a life that has its own momentum, not a life that only comes alive when family shows up. Difference number 4. Relationship quality with the children, 11:30, 1500. Burden versus blessing. Now here is the paradox at the heart of everything we're talking about today. And I want you to really hear this, because it took some of my patients years to accept it. The less emotionally dependent you are on your adult children, the better your relationship with them will be. When your adult children feel, consciously or not, that your entire emotional well-being rests on them, it creates pressure. Sometimes guilt. Sometimes resentment. Not because they don't love you, of course they do, but because no person can be the sole source of another person's meaning and happiness. That's too heavy a weight for any relationship to carry. And the difficult truth is, adult children who feel that weight sometimes begin to pull back. They don't answer the phone as quickly. They get busy. They create distance, not to hurt you, but because the closeness has started to feel like an obligation rather than a joy. Family therapist Murray Bowen called this differentiation. The ability of each person in a family system to maintain their own identity while staying connected to others. The families with the highest quality relationships are the ones where every member has a full, separate life and chooses to come together from that place of fullness rather than neediness. When you call your son because you genuinely want to share something wonderful, a hike you took, a book you finished, a funny thing that happened, that call feels different than when you call because the silence in the house has become unbearable. One is connection. The other is rescue. And your children know the difference, even if no one ever says a word about it. Difference number 5, purpose and meaning, 1500-1830, legacy versus waiting room. The fifth difference is perhaps the most profound, the question of meaning. When our primary source of meaning is being needed by our children and grandchildren, we've built our sense of purpose on something we cannot fully control, and something that, by the natural order of life, will change over time. Children grow up. Grandchildren get busy with their own lives. The role of needed parent shifts and shrinks. Viktor Frankl, the great psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, wrote that meaning cannot be given to you by another person, not even by the people you love most. Meaning must be found in work, in love, in suffering, and in the contribution we make to something larger than ourselves. Here's what I've seen. The people in their 70s and 80s who seem most alive, most curious, most warm, most at peace, are almost always people who are contributing to something beyond their family. They're mentoring young professionals. They're volunteering at schools or libraries. They're writing, creating, building, teaching. Organizations like the AARP Experience Corps place adults over 50 in schools to help young children learn to read. Studies have found that participants, the older adults doing the mentoring, show significant reductions in depression and even improvements in cognitive function. Not because they're around their grandchildren more, but because they've found purpose outside the nest. Your children can be a beautiful part of your legacy, but they cannot be all of it. The question worth asking yourself today is, what am I building that will outlast me? What contribution am I making that has nothing to do with who I gave birth to? That question, seriously considered, can change the entire second half of your life. Difference number 6, autonomy and dignity in later aging, 1830-2200. Dependence by default versus dependence by choice. The sixth difference is one that most people don't think about until it's too late, and I want to make sure you hear it while there's still time to act on it. There are two kinds of dependence in aging. The first is physical dependence, needing help with mobility, health, daily tasks. That kind of dependence comes naturally with time, and there's no shame in it. It's part of being human. The second kind is emotional dependence, the sense that you cannot feel okay, cannot find peace, cannot fill a day with meaning unless someone else is providing it for you. That kind of dependence is not inevitable, and it is worth fighting against with everything you have. Here's why it matters so much. The people who enter physical dependence while they still have a strong internal identity, a clear sense of who they are, what they value, what brings them joy, maintain their dignity in a way that is genuinely remarkable to witness. They accept help gracefully. They retain humor. They don't lose themselves in the process of being cared for. The people who enter physical dependence already emotionally hollowed out, already defined entirely by their relationships with others, often collapse in ways that are heartbreaking. The loss of function strips away the last thing they had. I am not saying this to frighten you. I am saying it because the work you do right now, building an internal life, a sense of self that does not depend on your children's attention, is not just about your happiness today. It is a direct investment in your dignity 10, 15, 20 years from now. Emotional independence now is how you protect yourself later. Difference number 7. The model you set for your children, 2200, 2530. What are you teaching them about old age? And now we come to the 7th difference, the one that almost no one thinks about, and the one I believe is the most important of all. Everything you do as you age, your children are watching. Your grandchildren are watching. And they are learning, whether you intend it or not, what it means to grow old. If what they see is a parent who stopped growing the moment the kids left home, a parent whose days are long and empty without family, a parent whose moods rise and fall entirely based on whether the family showed up this week, they are learning that old age is something to be feared, something lonely, something that requires rescue. And one day, they will be old too. And they will carry that picture of aging into their own lives. But if what they see is a parent who, even in their 70s, is still learning something new, still laughing with friends their own age, still showing up to life with curiosity and energy, still able to say, genuinely and without performance, "I'm doing well," they learn something completely different. They learn that the later years of life can be rich, that growing old doesn't mean disappearing. That is a gift beyond anything you can leave them in a will. I had a patient, I'll call her Ruth, 74 years old, retired school teacher, absolutely remarkable woman. She had gone back to painting in her 60s. She had a group of friends she hiked with every Saturday morning. She called her daughter once a week, and those calls were full of things Ruth wanted to share, not things she needed to get through the week. One day her daughter told her, with tears in her eyes, "Mom, I used to be afraid of getting old, but watching you, I'm not afraid anymore." That, right there, is the legacy that lasts. Let me bring it all together. 7 differences between aging with your children and aging with a life of your own. 1. Identity, being a person, not just a parent. 2. Emotional regulation, building happiness from the inside, not borrowing it from others. 3. Health outcomes, living actively, not passively waiting. 4. Relationship quality, showing up to family as a gift, not a need. 5. Purpose and meaning, building a legacy larger than your family. 6. Autonomy and dignity, protecting your sense of self for the years ahead. And 7. The model you set, teaching your children that growing old can be beautiful. None of this means loving your children less. It means loving yourself enough to keep growing, all the way to the end. Here's what I'd like you to do right now. In the comments below, type the words, "My life," as a simple declaration that you are choosing to build a life of your own, not instead of your family, alongside them, from a place of fullness rather than need. And if this video spoke to something real in you, please share it with someone you care about, because chances are, there's someone in your life who needs to hear this too. Thank you so much for being here. I'll see you in the next video, where we'll talk about the 5 practical steps to rebuilding your identity after the kids leave home. Take care of yourselves. You've earned it.